Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program. We're coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Our webinars every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They're recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 300 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you have questions for our speakers, we will have their information on the last slide of the presentation today. A special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. And now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information is on our website. We will also be hosting a virtual conference on hot topics in government contracting on June 23rd. Please register using the link in this slide. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 19,600 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. And now to introduce our speakers, Stephen Vito and Frank Stellato. Welcome, Stephen and Frank. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it. And I also want to thank the Jennifer Schaus and Associates. You've done a terrific job, and your team is just very professional. So thank you so much for that. Let's go to the first slide, and we can look at the agenda for today's webinar, Brand or Be Branded in Government Contracting. Let's go back one more. Anyway, my name is Steve Vito with Vito and Associates, and I'm joined, my co-presenter here is Frank Stellato. Frank?
Hi, everyone.
Frank, you may want to say, yep. Okay. All right, let's go to that first slide. Let's get going with the agenda. By the way, let me just make a couple of points. The premise of this webinar is your brand, company's brand, whether it's the product brand or their company brand, is absolutely the foundation of your marketing strategy, of your marketing messaging. And once it's defined and properly communicated, it's a powerful thing, and it has to be really treated carefully. But don't assume that you control 100% of how your brand is communicated. Yes, you control a lot of it, but not all of it. And we're going to get into that a little bit. All right, so let's go to the agenda. We're going to first talk about brand. I know there's a lot of people online today and probably representing a broad spectrum of their experience in branding and marketing. So we're going to take a quick second talking about that. Then we're going to talk about the government market, how it's different, how it's not, and if brand matters in government. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It does. And it's also not only is it important to your customers and clients, but to other stakeholders that you need to communicate to. So then we're going to talk a little bit about general considerations when developing a brand and developing and defining your brand during a crisis. This is obviously very, very timely given what's going on in society today. And then we're going to talk about ways you can communicate your brand. And finally, we're going to conclude with government executives' annual study on leading brands in government. I've seen this study many times. I haven't really seen the 2020 study, but it is terrific. And every marketer in this market should take a look at that study. And Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, I think later today, you're going to be releasing the results of that study, correct?
So we are having a number of events leading up to the release of the study on July 8th. But today we do have the first of those events this afternoon at 2 p.m.
And then we're going to be showing some of the highlights from that study later on in this webinar. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's define a brand. Here's something out of Wikipedia. I don't think anyone can argue with this. A brand is a name, a term, a design, a symbol, or any other feature that indicates, what you do. Okay, that's, pretty benign. I found one from Seth's blog. I actually like Seth's blog that deals with marketing, and it said a set of expectations. By the way, I love that, because don't you have an expectation when you're about to buy a product based on what you think or what you do know about that product? So a brand is a set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that, taken together, account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. A logo, design, packaging are a shadow of the brand, but not the brand. How true is that? And then I have my definition. It's the sum total of what others perceive of a company or product based on personal direct or indirect interaction, hearsay from others, or marketing communications. So it's the sum total of what somebody thinks of you. Okay, enough of the definition. Now let's see how it works in government. Next slide, please. Wait. Before we do this, the government market's different, isn't it? Well, yes, it is different. It is different, and it has to be acknowledged when you're defining your brand, but some areas it's not different. So any one of these slides, by the way, could be a webinar on themselves, but I picked out a couple of points on how it's different that I think pertain to brand development. So first, let's look at the market. The government market has a complex, lengthy procurement process, and it has a unique set of rules. FedRAMP certification, NAICS, CMMC, FSMA, FTARA. I could go on and on and on. It is a very peculiar, very trying procurement process. Government market is a volume buyer during good economic times and bad. I've been in this market 26 years. Government spends money in good times and it spends money in bad times. It just keeps going, keeps going. Doesn't have crazy swings. It just keeps plowing along. Here's another thing that's, I think, very unique to this market. It's about teaming strategies. They are crucial. If you're a prime or if you're a subcontractor, it's important to know what team you're either assembling or you're on. This next bullet point pertains mainly to IT. Multiple people are involved in the purchase at a minimum, and from a 60,000-foot perspective, the people, in my opinion, can be put in three different buckets. Either they're the contracts folks. These are the folks that make sure everybody abided by the right process and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, the contracts folks. There's the program people. These are the people who actually use the product. And then there's the technical people. These are the people that do the analyses and make sure that the technology is what they want. So those three areas is usually representative in the source selection committee. There are others, admittedly, but they fall into those buckets. And then, as I said, contracts come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. And this is just obviously a few IDIQs and BPAs and sole source and GWACs and on and on and on. So it has its uniqueness. Okay, next slide. But in addition, the government market is very similar to the non-government commercial market. Like any large organization, government markets, and particularly as it pertains to IT, that is moving towards digital transformation, migrating to the cloud, looking at AI, machine learning, very similar. What the government buys is not all that different than what commercial buys. It's how they buy that makes it so unique. Also, like the commercial market, it's highly competitive, and this puts a premium on your brand. Buyers have a lot of choices. When they put out a solicitation, you can believe it is received by a lot of people, and there's a lot of bidders. There's another thing that makes it similar. There's an abundance of information available, admittedly, some real, some not, about the offers. And past performance is something that is real, that bidders have to acknowledge and have to understand and have to address at times. But there is no shortage of information out there. So when company XYZ submits a bid, you can believe that the sole source folks will do their homework. These next 3 points I'm going to talk about a little bit further in the next slide, but I just want to touch on them now. Brand perceptions are increasingly more important. They're getting more significant as LPTA usage is declining. What is LPTA? It's lowest price, technically acceptable. This was something that came out a few years back where government was encouraging buyers, decision makers, just to go with the lowest price. OTAs are dramatically increasing. OTAs are other transaction authorities, and these are increasing in usage. OTAs enable government buyers to circumvent the FAR to build prototypes. Once the prototype is built, then they have to abide by the FAR if they want to scale it up and pursue it. But this is very important because brand definitely comes into play when government wants to utilize OTAs. Government may request a brand or name in their solicitation. This is in the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And if you're wondering what it is, 52.211-6. The government actually sometimes requests a brand or if its equivalency. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Lpta is declining. This is an article Nick Wakeman wrote in Washington Technology in September 2019, said contracting offices will need to document why Lpta, again, lowest price, technically available, technically acceptable, lowest price, technically acceptable, is the right approach for a procurement. So now contracting offices have to make a claim why they should use Lpta. Before it was just the opposite. The name of the article was, is this the end of Lpta as we know it? OTAs are on the rise, as I mentioned, and a proof of that is you'll see a lot of these innovations being formed by federal agencies. One of the more prominent is DIU, Defense Innovation Unit. They have offices in the Pentagon and offices out in Silicon Valley. And it is very, very unusual to see some of these people. I've visited the DIU out in Silicon Valley, and they're in jeans and sneakers and T-shirts, but they're DoD employees, and they're doing terrific work. And they're using OTAs. And sometimes, as I said, government requests brand or equivalent, and it's part of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. And I encourage you, if you want to learn more on this, read an article in the May 2020 issue of NCMA, Does the Brand Matter? It's by a gentleman by Alexander Gorelick. I understand he is going to be doing a webinar on this Jennifer South series here. And he's an attorney with Smith, Curry, and Hancock, and he wrote a terrific article, definitely worth reading, on Does Brand Matter? Okay, so I think brand matters in government because Lpta is on the decline, OTAs are on the rise, and government in their solicitations is sometimes asking for brands. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, here's an article out of Washington Technology on what DHS is doing. DHS, for example, and the title of the article is How New Initiatives Might Make Federal Sales Easier. Not going to make it easy, that'll never happen, but easier. DHS, for example, established a procurement innovation lab whose teams are testing the flexibilities built into the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR. So again, agencies understand that they need to bring innovation into government, and they are circumventing the FAR in multiple ways. Okay, next slide, please. So who does your brand influence? Well, I think it's a given that customers and prospects, of course. And you have to remember, government decision makers, government buyers are humans too. They're subject to messaging just like anybody else. They go on websites, they read, media. So it is reasonable to assume that they are subject to the same messaging. But also, it influences employee recruitment and retention. Here's an interesting statistic that I found in Ad Age. This is about a year old, but still very valid. Salary is no longer the top incentive to take a job. 86% of millennials would consider taking a pay cut to work at a company with a mission and values aligned with their own, according to LinkedIn's latest workplace culture report. By comparison, only 9% of baby boomers would. So 86% of millennials would consider taking a pay cut to work at a company with a mission and values aligned with their own, while 9% of us baby boomers would not. That's a would. That is, to me, fascinating. So when you communicate your brand, please keep your employees in mind. They want to know what your company stands for. Also, your brand influences partners. We talked about teaming partners. The strength of a team is only as strong as the weakest link. And you want to maintain a perception to the customers and to your fellow teammates that you uphold the highest standards. Also, federal system integrators, of course, they control so many contract vehicles, so much IT that flows to the government. You need to communicate to them. And that goes for resellers and other folks in the channel. And also competitors. Let's face it, competitors are keeping an eye on you, and you should keep an eye on them. So you're influencing them, you're influencing creditors, you're influencing the Hill, you're influencing the media. You want media to be open to talking to you. That's who you need to communicate your brand to. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about building your brand. This is, again, this one slide could be a webinar all unto itself, but let's go through it real quick. As we talked earlier, brand is not your logo, your colors, or your designs. That's part of it, admittedly, but it is not your brand. When you're building your brand, start from the perspective of your clients and your prospects. And I would say a good source of that information is your sales team. Ask them, what are their customers thinking about? If they bought from somebody else, why? What do they think about when they think of your product? Your sales team is a great source of information that too often I've seen is not tapped into. So you want to understand the perspective of your clients and prospects and what's important to them. Of course, do a market scan. You want to be distinct from your competitors. You want your brand to mean something else. And then finally, if you're not familiar with Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, I would really urge you to take a look at it. When developing your brand, answer why. And Simon Sinek says that people don't buy what you do. They don't buy how you do it. They buy why you do it. And he holds up a terrific example on Apple and iPhones. He said people buy iPhones to be aligned with Apple. There are a lot of good quality, technologically advanced phones out there. But why do they choose iPhones and at a premium? Because it's Apple. And Apple, they want to be aligned with what they perceive to be leading technology. So it's not what you do, it's not how you do it, it's why you do it. Okay, next slide. So we're in the middle of a crisis, and these next several bullet points talks about how to build a brand in a crisis, and should you alter your brand during a crisis. And they make the point, these points that I'm going to quote right now say, yes, you should. And if you look at, articles, advertisements on the media, advertisements on TV, you'll see that companies are adjusting their brands, maybe on a temporary basis, as a society, we work our way through these crises that we're encountering. So do consumers want to hear from brands during the crisis? Yes, they do. But when they're communicating, but only if the communication is comforting and reassuring to them and provide specific information about what brands are doing to respond to the pandemic. This particular article in Harvard Business Review was about revising your brand during a crisis. Another point is this is a moment when brands can prove that they put people, not profits, first. That was also from Edelman Marketing. And then another article out of Forbes magazine I would strongly urge you to take a look at is 16 important considerations for branding during a crisis. So yes, you should alter your brand as you're in a crisis. Okay, next slide, please. So now you want to communicate your brand. And as I said, it would be nice to assume that you control 100% of your communication of your brand. You do not. There are too many moving pieces out there. Your customers, your employees, your suppliers. There are too many people that have the ability to communicate. Your competitors communicate about you. So you're not the only one communicating. And by the way, let me also say one other thing. Communicating your brand does not have to be expensive. So here are some of the things that I always encourage folks to do. And often they're not done. Here's one. Develop a database of names. Almost anything you want to do, introduce a new product, announce a new employee, a new initiative, a new division, whatever, requires some sort of a correspondence, usually an email correspondence with names. So I would certainly suggest that you develop a database of names. Content marketing is a good way of doing it. It projects thought leadership and develops and maintains a database. Content marketing with terrific media companies such as Government Executive Media Group, they have a lot of terrific solutions that you can look at. Again, not overly expensive. Having your own blogs and newsletters, I am an enormous proponent of that. Social media, it's not hard. I would encourage you to develop a persona for that. Maybe it's you're head of federal sales, or maybe not, but think about a persona, and you can do it organically, or you can pay for promotion. I would encourage you looking at pay for promotion. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive. You can establish a budget and not to exceed that. You could do regular advertising, banner advertising. Earned media, absolutely. Earned media is otherwise known as public relations. Strongly urge you to do that. Today, I've been in marketing a long time, but today we have the privilege of being able to measure marketing effectiveness like never before. And I would say this, do not measure your marketing expenses against revenue. People that encourage that or ask that, to me, don't know anything about marketing. It really shows that the lack of understanding. However, you can measure against traffic to your website, downloads to your white paper or infographic, or the size of your database, the composition of your database. Is it .govs in there? Is it .mils? Is it .coms? So you could measure against some very clearly defined objectives, and that's what I would certainly encourage. Okay, next slide. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Frank Salato of Government Executive Media Group, which, again, if you're not familiar with their media operations, Government Executive, NextGov, Defense One, Route 50, do so today. They're terrific, high journalistic quality. Frank, my friend, it's all yours.
Thank you, Steve. And hello again to everybody watching. So with the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'll share some data and insights that hopefully build on the foundation Steve just laid relating to brand, helping you understand how to build brand in the government market. But before jumping in, I wanted to just share some background. So first, on the company I work for, Government Executive Media Group. Steve said much of what I was going to say, but just to give you a sense for the brands, across the public sector market. If you're not familiar with us, we have GovExec, which is our legacy 50-year brand that serves federal civilian managers. We have NextGov, which serves the federal civilian technologists. Defense One, which is our brand serving the defense and intel community. And then last but not least, Route 50, which serves the state and local government audience. Next slide, please. So I also just wanted to share some background about me. I've been with the company for just over 3 years, new to the government market, but I've been in marketing throughout my career. I came from sports, actually, where most recently I was with the Redskins and ran consumer marketing there. So you can see my title here. What I do in the day-to-day is manage our PR and messaging, our brand and sponsor marketing efforts, and our marketing services division, which is called Studio 2G, which essentially makes custom content in partnership with our clients to serve government audiences. So again, I'm going to share a lot of research and insights here, but I'm a marketer and a communicator. So the takeaways will kind of be coming from that lens. Next slide. The last bit of background I wanted to share is on leading brands, which we've mentioned a few times. So what is leading brands? This is a really dense slide, so I apologize, but the gist of leading brands is this. It's the largest study of its kind. It's designed to study how government decision makers perceive the brands that operate in the government market. So we've been doing this study for 5 years. We're in process of our 6th year. It's conducted by our in-house research team called Government Business Council. And in terms of the brands we study, there are a lot of factors that go into this. We tested 85 brands last year and expect a similar number this year. And we're, like I said, kind of in the final stages of fielding the 2020 study now, and are going to be unveiling the results at a digital event on July 8th. More to come on that as well. Next slide, please. So in studying brands in government, we look at it through the lens of familiarity, so how well you are known, and favorability, how well you are liked. So this graph is kind of shows how brands stack up in 4 quadrants. We're obviously occupying the top right quadrant, a group of brands that we call renowned is ideal. And the research team, GBC, Government Business Council, tests a number of brand attributes that ultimately drive a brand's performance in this study in terms of favorability and familiarity. So I've listed a few of those key attributes below just to give you a sense of them. But again, we'll touch on this more later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So really the question is this, how do you become a leading brand in government? What are the things brands should be doing to really penetrate our market? And that's the question I was trying to answer in preparing for today's session. And what I found in combing through kind of years of leading brands presentation data were 7 lessons that I hope you all can take and incorporate into your brand strategy. Next slide, please. So lesson 1, we'll start there. You have to reach and engage the entire buying team. And Steve really illustrated this so well earlier. But what our study has shined a light on is that these teams are both big and diverse. They are diverse in terms of seniority level. You see the chart there on the left. You would think purchasing decisions are being made by the most senior of government employees. You can see that there are many involved in the purchase process, 31%, that are GS-12 or lower. You also see diversity in job function or role in an agency or department. So for instance, when a technology solution is being considered by an agency, it's the technologists, the practitioners who are certainly a part of that process, but it's also program managers, procurement officers, administrators, so on and so forth. And then while it isn't shown here, it's also important to note that buyers are diverse geographically. So 73% of federal buyers, according to our study, are outside the DC metro area, and that's kind of spread across a number of geographic areas. So coming back to branding, reach across the entire buying team is super important if you're going to translate brand resonance into dollars. Next slide, please. And what that brings us is to lesson 2. Which is that it's critical to get in front of buyers where they are. So by that I mean you want your brand front and center on the platforms and content formats that government audiences are consuming. So this chart is from last year's presentation, and the information sources are rank ordered by the aggregate of both the green bar, which is our federal respondents, and the gray bar, which is the state and local respondents. So a few takeaways here. Government audiences consume content at a really high rate, especially state and local audiences. That was new that we added last year, kind of the state and local side of this, and their levels of content consumption are truly staggering. The other thing that I see in this is, that audiences engage with brands and get their news in a number of different ways. So going back to 2017, online news articles and email newsletters have led the way by a pretty sizable margin in many cases. But the other thing that I would call out here is that after that first grouping, you see a pretty big drop off between digital events and social media. At that social media part in the graph, you see a pretty big drop. So there's still value in these platforms. Podcasts especially are one that has really grown in consumption in the last couple of years, but you'll want to focus your energy on the channels and sources that are being consumed the most. Next slide, please. So I mentioned attributes earlier, and this is where we get into it a little bit more. So in the data below, what you see is how respondents from 2018 and 2019 rated the importance of the attributes, all of the attributes that we studied. So being trustworthy and delivering customer service are two of are the two most important things to hone in on. 2017 data says the same thing. And just to give you a sense of this, we're doing a webinar later today on the importance of trust, especially in the here and now, in the midst of a pandemic. So that should tell you all you need to know about this trend continuing into the 2020 study. But I do want to talk a little bit more about trust and customer service, because from a brand perspective and in terms of thinking through how you can affect how your brand is perceived against these attributes, improving how well your brand is trusted and how strong your customer service operation is, those are long-term initiatives. In many cases, that would require mobilizing your entire organization. You might not feel that right away, but what you can do in the short term is to start talking about trust and service on your channels, in your marketing materials, with your people internally, so that they carry your message out to market. I think to Steve's point earlier, your sales staff, are great kind of in both directions, in hearing what the market is saying, and then also in kind of carrying the water out to market. So you want to make it clear to your audience, though, that these two things are a priority. And while that can't be the be all end all, you have to have kind of operations behind that. It can definitely be a start. Next slide, please. Lesson 4 is about differentiation. So, and Steve, you touched on this earlier as well, but this chart was pulled from our 2018 study, where of the 81 companies that we evaluated, 54 of them, 2/3 of them, used the term IT transformation on the first page of their government website. So the key here, as you can imagine, is finding a way to stand out, to differentiate yourself. And whether it's IT transformation or not, many of you are likely vying for contracts against multiple competitors who claim to do the same or similar things. So you have to evaluate, and Steve called this scanning the market. You have to evaluate how your brand is different and lead with that in how you go to market. Attributes where you perform really well, as suggested on the slide, are great examples of differentiators that you can really lean into with your messaging. Next slide, please. And I think the best way to shift favorability is to focus primarily on educating your audience. So a commonality in prior year studies is that those who improve the most in terms of how well liked they are, they publish a lot of educational content and research. So the left-hand side here provides some thought starters for creating that sort of content. But I think it really begins with being useful to your buyers, kind of throughout the process. So at the discovery stage, consideration stage, and then decision stage. So in the early stages, you want quick hit, informative content that addresses the why. Why is your solution important? In the consideration stage, you want to address the how. Guides, ebooks, videos explaining how your specific product or solution might work. And then in the decision stage, you might want to consider case studies or solution briefs or vendor events to kind of illustrate how this has worked for other agencies or departments in implementation. The key in all of this content is to be objective and to take a really helpful, informative stance. And the other thing I would note here is that you want this to continue once they are customers too. That's a great way, just getting back to the earlier point about customer service. That's a great tool kind of in the customer service toolkit in ways to, really be there for the people that you're working with in the day-to-day. Next slide, please. The next lesson here is to market to specific attributes. So for many of the partners that we work with, they buy our leading brand study. They identify the attributes at that time where their brands need to improve. And then they immediately ask, well, how do we do that? Or better said, what can we do from a marketing and comms perspective to improve? And I think what this chart does is it maps content formats and content type to the attributes that you really intend to focus on. I think it does this pretty well. So for instance, if you have a trust problem, maybe you showcase your SMEs in a series of interviews, because as the old adage goes, people trust people before they trust brands. If you want to improve your perception around value, perhaps you're going to showcase case studies that illustrate the value an agency or department received from working with you or adopting your solution. Events are a great way to showcase your expertise, and that remains true today, even with kind of live events being totally disrupted right now. Digital events are a great way to showcase your brand's expertise in a certain topic area. So again, these are just ideas for you in terms of how to best market against the attributes that you really need to focus on. Next slide, please. And then our final lesson here is that you want to target specific attributes to specific audience segments. This is marketing 101, right? These are a few examples from last year's study of the attributes that really matter to certain audience segments. So older respondents in our study, they really rated brands with experience and expertise highly. Rising managers or younger respondents, employee care really mattered to them. Power buyers, so the top level government decision makers, they really care about expertise and value. The point is here, each of us, each of you likely have specific audience targets that are really important for you to influence and engage. So it's kind of a worthwhile endeavor to figure out what those audience segments really care about as it relates to brands, and then use that to inform your programming and the ways you decide to go engage these audiences. Next slide, please. So this is, just a bit of a recap. There are a number of ways to improve how your brand is perceived by government buyers, but we believe that these are some of the key ingredients to consider. So moving the dial with the full buying team, and the important thing to remember here is this team is more diverse and larger than perhaps you would think. Getting in front of buyers where they are. Online news sites, email newsletters, white papers, and events are kind of the top performers here. You want to build trust and serve your customers first. You want to be conversant about those two things, those two attributes in every way that you can in the short term. Be strategic about your positioning. So identify how you're different among your competitive set, and then make that the focus of your messaging. You want to educate the market to shift favorability. So you want to create kind of objective, informative content across every phase of the decision process. And then, like we mentioned, post-purchase once they're customers. And then you want to market to specific attributes, identifying gaps in soft areas, and then building program around that, building programming around that. And then lastly, targeting specific attributes to specific audience segments. Determining what key attributes, or what attributes I should say, your key audience segments care most about, and then working backward with your planning from there. Next slide, please. And if you do that, I don't know if you can advance this to show. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. This is going to take you through every single one. If you do that, you can become a leading brand. So these were the 25 leading brands in government as named in the 2019 study. And if you go to the next slide, we're about to do this. We're in the process of doing this study again for 2020. So things for you to keep an eye out for, as a quick plug for the 2020 leading brands. We're hosting 2 digital events, one of which, as mentioned, is On Trust and is actually being hosted later today at 2 p.m. We're hosting those 2 digital events in run-up to our unveiling event of the 2020 Leading Brands in Government, which is on July 8th. All this is digital. I have links embedded in the presentation to register for these events, learn more about the study, et cetera. So, I hope you all, found today's time and session informative and helpful, and B, come join us in the future on the, with leading brands. I think it is a really helpful study in our market. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly either. My email address, I believe, is on the final slide. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Stephen and Frank, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us. And thank you to everyone who joined us. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. Just a reminder that we will be hosting a virtual conference on hot topics in government contracting on June 23rd. You can register using the link in our website. And please join us this Friday as we cover each part of the FAR, and join us next Wednesday for more hot topics in federal contracting.